Well, good morning, everybody. It's Tom Christie back in the painting studio. I'm actually doing some drawing, some pattern development for a new project that I'm going to start. Red-breasted Merganser Drake. This will be a half-size drake, so it's about 7.5 inches long in the body. And I have not done a red-breasted drake on my channel, so I thought while I'm doing this bird, it's a good bird to feature. Some really challenging things about the shapes, geometry, trying to represent this crest, the very narrow, thin bill. But we should have some fun doing it. And this is going to be a donation bird for the fundraising auction at the World Carving Championships to raise funds for the Ward Foundation, who invests all of their time and efforts into putting the World Carving Championships show together for us. So it's a way for me to give back to them for all that they've done for me over the since 1989. I've been to every show except one since '89. So I don't know how many that adds up to, but it makes me an old person. Anyway, I think this will be a fun project. We'll bring the camera in, get a look at the pattern work that I did so far, and then get out to the carving shop. If you're enjoying my channel, please hit that subscribe button. Many of you have done that. I really appreciate it. And it's a show of support for the channel. It's free. I'll keep it that way. I'm just trying to build interest in carving for a hobby because of the I just think there's great value in making something with your hands, the craftsmanship associated with carving and painting, and the love of waterfowl, wildfowl. So it combines a lot of things that I really enjoy, and I just want to share that with other people. All right, let's take a look at what I've done so far. Welcome back. I did a lot of searching online and was inspired by this picture of a swimming drake, and kind of converted that into my pattern. So I've got my drawing here. I also leaned heavily on Pat Godden's Red-breasted Merganser pattern. It's you can tell it's different than Pat's pattern, but his book is so helpful in terms of the shapes of things, the actual size and dimension of things like the bill itself, and that helps me as I'm doing a half-size version of this bird and putting it onto paper. Being able to refer to his patterns, really helpful. And I did want to let people know Pat Godden does have a website, goddenart.com. He sells individual patterns on that website very reasonably, and it's a great resource for wildfowl carvers. Okay, so I made my drawing, made a plan view by kind of transposing key lines down and then getting a reference dimension from Pat's top-down view, because top-down views are tough to find, as most of you are aware. Very few people spend time taking pictures of the top-down view of a bird. So that's where Pat's book comes in handy. You can find them sometimes, but what I've done here is used a little bit of his dimensioning. I'm going half size, so I could take dimensions off his pattern, cut them in half, kind of transpose here, and get a nice top-down pattern to match up with my drake here. And then I used that drawing to make the patterns here that I'm going to use in the wood carving shop. Speaking of which, let's go do some pattern layout on Tupelo. Okay, I've got the Tupelo block sized and my patterns side and top down on that block. For the head, I'm going to make the crest out of paintbrush bristles. I did that on a hen Merganser demonstration earlier. This is on a miniature. I've never tried this before, but I want to simulate the crest of that bird with paintbrush bristles, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. But I took the crest off of the pattern because I want to cut the head to this size and then insert the crest. And for the bill, I'm not comfortable with just a Tupelo bill. Out here it's so thin and narrow, it's going to be very fragile. So I'm using an old paintbrush that I had available, hardwood dowel, and I've drilled into the face of the bird and inset that in there at the proper angle. And I'm going to let that epoxy set, and then we can cut out the head. Not a very glamorous looking thing right now, but again, we want strength in the bill. I didn't have any hardwood dowels laying around. I had this old paintbrush, and that'll serve the purpose. Mechanics-wise, improvise, as my dad used to say. Using the coping saw just to begin to narrow the tip of the bill. And I'll do most of this with grinding equipment, but use the coping saw to get a little bit of material off there. Now I'm going to use my coping saw to cut off these wedges, starting at the bill and going back past the eye. Kind of using my top-down pattern to guide me on how far to cut back here. But you can see I've given myself a vertical guideline on the side there, and that's kind of my target as I'm coping this off. And I'm using the coping saw here because this small scale, there's nothing to hang on to. I'm not comfortable bandsawing these pieces off, and there's more control with a coping saw in a small scale like this. Okay, I've got those trimmed off, and now I'll get the back trimmed in similar fashion. I'm going to keep this relatively blunt back here because there's going to be this crest that we fabricate and install. So I don't want a razor point, but I am narrowing the back of the head here to give it that angle back there that I'm going to need for the crest. All right, I've started to shape up the bill, narrow it. I'm going at that slowly, maybe still a little long, but I want to carve slowly and go ahead and begin to shape the head. I've got the crown width marked out there, the cheek locations, and the neck underneath. And so I'm just going to do some carving to define the edges of the bill as it meets the face here, get that established. The first thing I want to do is put some more definition around the bill, and I've got a little cylindrical ruby burr here, and I want to use that to carve in the shapes through. I'm carving right through the epoxy that I set the dowel in with, and just carving in the detail shapes up here on the crown and also on the side. Is very unique shape on a merganser. The feathers extend out onto the bill a little ways. So just pay attention to your reference materials. If you note here, I've also, I'm using a paintbrush handle with a screw in the end of it to give me a little additional grip as I'm grinding. There you can see that green paintbrush handle with a screw in the end. It's just a tool that I use for this type of small work, especially if I'm going to be using a burr. I don't want my hands anywhere close to a powerful burr. So I use a handle like this to really help manipulate the carving and stay safe. Not too concerned about that with a ruby bit like this. Again, I don't want to hit my hands with it, but it's a lot less aggressive than a burr. So I'm just going back and forth. It's a little more challenging because of the epoxy in that area, but I'm using some of the epoxy to help me shape things up. I made sure I put plenty of epoxy in that dowel so that it kind of blends into the Tupelo head. Now I'm switching to this. This is kind of a triangular shaped medium grit ruby bit, and I'm going to use this instead of a burr again because this is such tight, close work, and my hands have to be pretty close here, even with the handle. So I'm going to use rubies instead of a real aggressive burr in this carving, and this does a fine job taking material off. Takes a little bit longer, but not much. I'm just using it to narrow the crown now and create a little bit of an eye channel there. Rounding the back of the neck. And I'm working to get that crown width to these pencil lines up here. And kind of blend that into the bill. Now I'm going to cut underneath here, the cheek. There's a little bit of an overhang and the neck's down in this area. So I'm using the side of the ruby to kind of cut a trench there and get that down to this guideline I put for myself below. Now I can use the side of the ruby to round the cheeks from that eye line down and also underneath here. So we develop kind of an hourglass shape from the front. And this is the first time I've carved this particular bird at this scale, so I'm just going to go at it slow because I'm kind of making it up as I go. I'm going to leave the head square right now until I get my eye set to the proper dimension, the width between the eyes, and we'll see that in a little bit. I'm going to take this area back here down a little bit more because when I install that crest, I want the crest bristles angling in and meeting in the center. So we need a little bit of a slope back there. All right, I'm going to jump ahead. Basically, I'm going to do this side in the same way that I did the other side. Okay, a little farther along, and I've got this side kind of shaped up. Just taking a look at symmetry from side to side, and I need to take this cheek down a little bit more to match up with the other one. I can round this area as the crown meets the bill here. I can also use this ruby bit to continue to shape up the bill, take a little more dimension off of the bill, and I'm going to keep going back to my pattern to compare it to the bill. I don't want this to look like a straight stick poking out of the end of the face. It has definite shape and curvature to it, and I want to make sure we develop that because it's really key to conveying the essence of this bird. Now that I have the bill shaped up, I've penciled in a line, and I'm going to very carefully take my knife and score a line between the upper and lower mandible here to create some separation. You can see I've got this right on my bench. Anytime I'm working with a knife, it's so important to maintain control, and you can't afford a slip. So just taking my time. This is very hard wood, by the way, so taking my time to get a nice line. Now I'm going to go back to the grinding bench, and with a very small ruby cylinder here, I'm going to use the edge of that to follow my knife line. And I mentioned this is very hard wood, so I'm just going at this slowly. It's good that it's hardwood because that's what we want for strength on this long, narrow bill. A little bit of an upturn in the corner there. And then I'm just peeling out a little bit of material between the upper and lower mandible. You can see the shadow there. Now I'm using my wood burner on the lower mandible here, pressing the tip in to create some little sawbill look. Now I want to use a little ruby ball. I went back to my reference, got my nostril location penciled in. I'm not going to try to detail any structure around this nostril on this bird. So I'm just going to paint those in. And I'm going to use the ruby ball to do a little definition on the nail here. So cutting in a little bit of a groove on both sides. And then you can't see that, but I was using a little sandpaper to smooth that up. And now I'll use my pencil to pencil in the nostrils and make sure I've got them positioned correctly. This makes it easier to see them from the top down, from the front, make sure they're level. And then I'm doing the same thing on the nail here with my pencil so I can get a better look at symmetry. It looks pretty good. Now I'm going to use my 1/2-inch sanding drum with 150 grit Swiss sandpaper and just go over the entire head and finish shaping things up, rounding the cheeks, removing all the burr lines, and getting ready for taking a look at the distance between the eyes. But first I want to get everything smoothed out here. This 1/2-inch drum works well for this purpose. I'm smoothing and also shaping if I need to do some final shaping up, especially with Tupelo and 150 grit paper. I can do a little bit of sculpting with this sanding drum. Getting the neck nice and round there. Getting ready for the next step. So I'll move on. All right, finishing up the sanding here. Got things pretty well rough sanded. And now I'm going to switch to a ruby bit, again, this pyramid shaped bit, and I've penciled in some cheek marks here. Just in a couple of places I want to add a little cheek detail. Not very deep, pretty subtle, but just enough to throw a little bit of a shadow there. And then I'm going to fade that into the surrounding area so it's a nice, smooth cheek detail and not a deep groove that's going to throw a harsh shadow. I'll do the same thing on this side. So I'm going from the corner where the upper and lower mandible meet and then up towards the eye and then a little farther back as well. It's a little hard to see in this light, in this harsh overhead light, but there's just a little bit of a subtle shadow there. And I'll keep working that, and I'll use some sandpaper and maybe even the sanding drum to make sure these are nice and smooth. A little farther along here and finishing that up, you can see just a subtle little shadow there. All right, I've got that hand sanded, and now I want to work on the eyes. So I'm using my dividers, and I've got the eyes positioned, and I have their size mapped out there as well. And I'm using a little flame-shaped ruby bit, the very tip of that, to go around the perimeter of the eye and cut a groove. And then begin rounding the eye itself, and then rounding the surrounding area as well. This will take some time to develop a nice rounded looking eye, but I'll keep going deeper with the tip of that flame-shaped bit, and then again rounding into the surrounding area. I've chosen to carve the eyes on this bird because I don't have eyes this small in my inventory, and I think this is a nice way to work a half-size bird. I'm just making sure those are level as I continue to work them dimensionally. I don't want this to look like a flat disc when we're done. I want to have a nice curvature to the eye and make it look like it's inset to the feathers of the head. But you get the general gist of how I'm forming these up. Just taking a look at my dimension, it looks like I'm right on where I want to be there. Now I'm going to use my pencil, go around the perimeter of the eye to help me look at symmetry again. And it also helps identify where I need to continue to work. So I'll get those shaped up. Now we're a little farther along, and I'm going to with my pin vise and a flame-shaped ruby bit, and by using the pin vise like this, it gives you a lot of control, and I can see better as well, and just kind of manually rough sand these areas around the eye. I've also got a little cone-shaped sanding bit there, and I've put a screw in that like a handle, and this is kind of a nice tool for this purpose, just to take it to the next level of smoothness. And I'm just rounding that eye, so I'll keep working that until it's smooth. Now I've got my eyes set where I want them to be, and the symmetry is set, so now I can round the crown. Sorry, I'm creeping off out of camera view there, but I'm using a little cone or triangular shaped medium grit ruby bit, the one that we use to carve the head with, and I'm just rounding to that center line above the eye to the center of the head. And the bird has a nice round head from the reference photos that I've been taking a look at from the front. It's got quite a curvature on the head up there. And then I'm going to angle this back to the center line so that when we install the crests, they'll kind of angle towards that center line. So I'm just going to work that until I have it nice and round and smooth. And then I'm going to come back with my 1/2-inch drum and just finish the job here, rounding the head. You can see I'm pushing that away from me. That's a little less aggressive than if I'm pulling it towards me. And it's a nice way to kind of finesse using this sanding drum. Just a reminder to keep your center line intact so we don't lose the profile of the head. That's important. So I'll finish sanding this and then come back. Okay, I've got that sanded, and now I want to build this crest that's going to fit on the head and really complete the head. This is a crest building technique I've used before. I've got the pattern of the crest taped down there, and then over the top of that, with the adhesive side up, I've put some clear packing tape, and I'm going to use bristles from this old house paintbrush, synthetic bristles, and pull them off a little at a time. And with the adhesive up, I can kind of line these up. That's the theory. So I want those to stick to the adhesive, and some of them are going to blow away. That's okay. It's a kind of a messy process, but I want some of these to cross over get the stray ones out of the way. Lay those on and kind of follow the pattern I had here. These are obviously much too long, but we're going to trim those up after we get them stuck together. And what I'm going to do is lay a little bit of 2-part epoxy in this area where I've drawn a little additional material there below the crest, below where it's going to come out of the head. And so I'll work on this until I get my bristles ready, and then we'll look at the epoxy process. Okay, I've got the bristles placed. Now I've got my epoxy mixed up, and I'm just going to lay over the top a bead of this epoxy. And this will take a few attempts to get enough material on there. What I'm trying to do is tie all the ends of the bristles together like they are in that paintbrush. But hold the bristles in this position that I want. And I'm trying to keep this epoxy low enough that I can trim it up later. And this will make then an insert into the carved head. So I don't want this glue to be very thick. I'm going to spend some time. I have 5 minutes to get it smoothed out, thinned out, and when that sets, we can peel it off of the tape, use some scissors to trim everything up. I demonstrated this technique in Wildfowl Carving Magazine a long time ago, but I really think it makes a realistic looking crest for a merganser. There's a loose one I want to get out of the way. So I'll be back. I'm going to make 3 of these, and this one is the first one I made. The epoxy is starting to set up. I kind of sketched in the head profile there so that I can now use scissors, and I want to leave just a little additional material to embed in the head. But while this epoxy is not completely set up, it's easier to trim. So I just trimmed that epoxied edge to the proper shape so that I can embed that in the head later. I'm going to go ahead and let that set up now, and then I can peel the entire thing off, and we can trim up the bristles. Okay, the epoxy is set up a little bit more, and while it's still flexible, I want to peel the tape off the epoxy and the bristles, especially the epoxy, because if I wait too long, this sets up and becomes brittle. So I want to do this while it's still flexible. Obviously he's got a big hairdo right now, but like I said, we'll trim that up. And these ones that go on the side, this one's going to go in the center, but the ones that go on the side, I can kind of have them cure in a rounded, curved position like that, so that I can embed them in the side of the head, and they follow the contour of the head. This last one, same process. I'm just reversing the pattern because I want a rough side and a smooth side that I can work with on each side of the bird. I'll show you what I mean later. This is what I meant by a rough side and a smooth side. The side against the tape is nice and smooth. The side where I applied the epoxy is a little more bumpy. Now I've got the pattern over the bristles here, and I'm just cutting them to length to kind of match up with my pattern. I've got just a good sharp knife, trying to get kind of the major separation between upper and lower sections and get the length set. And I've given myself a little bit of extra material here that I can embed into the head and still have the right length on the crest. Now I'm going to use my scissors to keep trimming things up and go back in the other direction, put some separation so they're not grouped up like this one is. I want to go back in this direction, shorten some of them up. Easier said than done. There we go. Put some V shapes in here so there's some separation. I'll work on that a while, but you get the idea. Now I'm going to use this small ruby cylinder and go in and put a slot in the center of the back of the head here, carefully. And this doesn't have to be very deep, maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. And I've marked out where the crest meets the top of the crown there and where it meets the back of the neck. And I'm just creating a slot so that we can install the crest in the center of the head here. I'm just going over that multiple times to get to the depth that I need. And then we'll use epoxy and set that in place. Already looking good. He lost his hairpiece there. All right, let's get that installed. All right, I used the 2-part epoxy to install that center crest, and now I'm penciling in where I want to carve in additional grooves so we can inset the 2 side crests. And I've got that same small cylindrical ruby bit, and I'm going down and creating a little bit of a groove here so that I can set the side crest in this position to meet up in the center with the center crest that's already installed. I don't need much depth here, just about probably an 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little less, to get the width of that insert. And I'm going to put it right next to the other one there. I'll do the same thing on this side so that we have 3 crest inserts all meeting in the middle. And the reason I do 3 is to really fill out the crest. You can see a single crest in the center looks pretty decent, but I just feel like it looks even better if we can kind of fill it out so that from the top down view we have a nice crest formed in kind of a triangular shape that meets in the middle in the back. It just fills out and gives us more fullness in the crest. So this one is going to go right in this position, and you can see it's still a little flexible. So I can bend it to meet the curvature that I've carved. That looks pretty good. Same approach here, just laying glue in the slot, the 2-part epoxy. Then kind of forming that in place. And then the same on the opposite side. Now I'm just taking a little Bondo and spreading that over that joint between the bristles and the head so that we can do a little bit of a transition. Blend those together. I don't need much. just to fill in any gaps that are there. A little bit of an opening there in top, so I'll close that up. Just a quick look at that. We'll let that Bondo set overnight. Just a top-down view gives you a nice angled from both sides shape. All right, that's a good place to stop. And in session 2, we'll work on the body, get it cut out and shaped up, and see how far we get. Till then, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving to you.